Good. Let me remind you briefly what we did yesterday. So we studied the first 6 aspects of this. Study of cyclic circuits, which come from the idea that cyclic circuits are very good, and they are very useful, and they could be exponentially smaller than acyclic circuits for the same calculation, and with the same behavior. With the same behavior, meaning that their behavior is trivial. So I mentioned this circuit here, which is generated by sharing f and g between these two subterms. And if you don't share, you have to duplicate f and g. And if you take fgh, you have to triplicate each of them, and so on, or more than that. And you will have the exponential design. So what is good in this design is that there is a condition C that will tell which way the switches, the rectangular switches here are taken. And so, for example, if you put the switch to the switch command to 1, it takes this path, which is exactly the same kind of path as in a cyclic circuit, and otherwise it takes this path. So this cycle is no problem because it's cut electrically, logically, and so on. And so the problem was to detect when that was the case. And remember that there are 3 kinds of cyclic circuits: the bad ones, where there is no hope of doing anything either logically or electrically; the good ones, which is the one we have seen; and the weird one, which is a Hamlet, to be equal to be or not to be, or something like that. That is formulas that have a unique Boolean solution, but for no good reason. Reason meaning deductive reason. They may depend on the excluded middle, for example. And so there is no causal reason, no causal chain from some kind of inputs to outputs, and this is bad. And we want to reject this one and this one equally, and for the same reason. We don't need to have a specific reason to reject this one, which would not apply to this. And so the idea is to first look at what's happened electrically. And so what we do then, we add delays. You can put delays anywhere you want, provided you put at least 1 delay in each loop, and a syntactic loop. And for the other case in not delay, I said you can simplify them, which what you do in circuits, because you never, it's not because you write OR and XOR that you will implement OR and XOR. You implement that very differently by synthesis tool. But actually I made a little mistake, that you are not allowed to apply full Boolean rules, but only constructive Boolean rules, that you are not allowed to do excluded middle either there. And in fact, you could also keep, just to simplify the reasoning, but you could keep you can put delay everywhere and keep the case separated. It just makes the formal treatment just a little bit more complex, but not much. Okay, good. Now we have seen that the formalization of a delay is the least one you can have, the most general one. A delay is simply the thing that if you have an history, a signal that oscillates but remains stable enough at the input of the delay, then the output of the delay will take the value of the input. That's the definition of a delay. And if the input is not stable enough, the output is allowed to do absolutely anything. This is not an exact modeling of electrical delay. It doesn't want to be that. It's more permissive than electrical delays, and you really are completely portable with this kind of delay. You don't suppose anything of electronics. There are other delays which have bad properties, like the inertial delay, which say basically that the output cannot change if there is no input change for some time. And this delay looks nice, but it's very, very bad because you can transform wires into memories and have all sorts of bad effects. And anyway, it's not physical either. Good. So we are interested in stable histories. The circuits, we put inputs and we want the outputs to be stable in finite time. So we are interested in 2 kinds of history only, oscillating and stable. So we have a weak logic because we don't want to model everything. We just want to model that. And so in the logic, the important part is negation. So The logic is about stability. So, for example, x stable to 1 means in the history between t and u, then this property is true in the logic. And the negation is not that this property is not true. This property is constantly false during the timing in question. This is the intuitionistic character of logic. Negation is not absence of verification of the property, it's verification of the contrary electrical property. Negation of 0 is 1. It's not absence of 0. It's not oscillating. Good. So, negation is phi is never satisfied, and different from phi is not satisfied. And here modality makes intuitionistic character very clear. So this is the whole logic, and just to remember what it is. So that's a model where you have trajectories on real numbers or rational numbers, or doesn't matter. And this is the whole logic about histories. Then, but computing with this logic is the logic doesn't help by itself. And to make it useful, you need deduction rules. And so the deduction rules were very simple. I remind you, true is always true. And if R is true after a delay D, and if you take a longer delay and a weaker property, where R is simply a Boolean predicate, then you get S true after delay E. And chaining, if R is true and R implies in the intuitionistic sense that S is true after D, then S is true after D plus E. This allows us to pass gates. And joining, which means that if two properties become true after delay D and E, then their intersection becomes true after delay D max of D and E. Good. And then we see that the only thing that matters in the delays is max and plus. Good. Then the main theorems were that for the formulae that we consider, which are stabilization formulae, given the circuit, we want a stabilization formula, which is simply infinite or finite disjunction of regions, of temporal regions, that is of predicates being true after a time. Then the model and the deductive logic coincide. And that's not a trivial result. And the other result is that it makes the model intuitionistic over infinite terms. And then the central result is that in any circuit with delays, there are two possible behaviors only. Either all the history stabilize in finite time and bounded time actually to the same value, which means all circuits are deterministic if they don't oscillate, or there is one oscillating history. And we want to reject circuits where there is one oscillating history. So the proof was given yesterday. So now I said the good news is that once we have demonstrated this theorem on one particular timing for a circuit, then we can get rid of time. So why is that true? Because if you look at the proof, you will see that. You can replace timed logic by untimed constructive logic. And so untimed constructive logic is like that. It's a complete propagation. It's propagation of values, trivial propagation of values. And for an equation of the circuit, if variable x in the circuit or gate x is defined as some Boolean expression of other gates, then if you can prove that the right hand side has value b, then you can prove that x has value b. You have no delay. You have no more delay, but it looks the same. And in fact, it is the same. So here is the proof transformation. So you have this circuit here, which was our working circuit. S1 is x bar. S1 is a delay. So after delay D1, S1 becomes x bar. And after delay D2, S2 becomes x bar plus S1 bar plus S2. So here was the proof. You assume x is 0, which means that from 0 to infinity, x is true. This is this delay 0 x bar. And the proof is like that. Because of this chain rule, you know that S1 is true after D1. Here, because x bar is true by weakening, you know that x bar plus S1 plus S2 is true. And then by the chain rule, you know that S2 becomes true after D2. And then by join rule, you know that S1, S2 becomes true after max D1, D2. This is simply a temporal simulation of the circuit. Okay? Now you can transform this proof into a constructive Boolean logic proof. Trivially, just forget about delays and change a little bit the syntax, that's all. For example, you want to take this x is 0, you say x is 0. You forget about the delay here, and you copy it here the same way. And remember, this means that I omit this turnstile because the input vector is always the same, and the circuit definition is always the same. So now what you do, you copy the equation here. So this is in the syntax, in the other syntax with the same equation. And then because of the equation rule in constructive Boolean logic, you can say that S1 is 1. So you don't have delay, but you have one deduction. And D1 doesn't matter. You just forget about D1, but you say that there is an essential step, which is to take one deduction. And here it's the same, because this is just Boolean, elementary constructive Boolean reasoning. And then you can take the equation, and applying the constructive Boolean logic equation rule, you can deduce S2 equals 1, no delay. And then because you have S1 equals 1, S2 equals 1, by the end rule, this one transforms into S1 equals 1, S2 equals 1. So it is simply copying the proof, forgetting the delays, and changing a little bit the syntax. Trivial. But the point is that it is reversible. That is, if you have a constructive Boolean logic proof, it's trivial to put back the delays in it. And you can see very easily that the two proof systems are indeed completely isomorphic. There are no more proofs in delays than without delays, and conversely. Which means that if you prove the circuit for one delay, then for one delay assignment, then you prove it completely in Boolean logic. But that means that you can transform the proof to any other delay assignment, which means that circuits which behave well for one delay behave well for every delay assignment. Which means that reasoning for every delay assignment is exactly the same as reasoning without delay at all. Constructively, of course, without delay at all. So that's very simple. I mean, this is exactly what we thought it should be, but it is true. And it's very easy to do a hand-waving proof. Many people have done that. But transforming a hand-waving proof into a proof is not really that easy. And the central theorem is not easy. Good. So that's very nice. But what does it tell? We get a lot of benefit out of that. So now we can forget about electricity completely. We can stick to the abstract realm of circuits, where you just write Boolean equation, you hit return, and you have magic going on, so that the electronics people tell you 4 gigahertz. This is what happens in reality. That's fine. But now if you look at what's happening in one particular instance, the extremely important property, which is why this theorem is true, is that in any execution, each gate is used only once, at most once. That is, you extract a simple acyclic path out of the cyclic network. So it's just a proof tree you extract. And a proof tree cannot pass twice by the same object. Which means also that the circuit will be fast. It will be exactly as fast as a normal circuit. In asynchronous circuit techniques, you can use several times the same gate in the same reaction. That's another game. Much more difficult that everybody has abandoned, basically. Because it's too difficult. Good, that's nice. So that means also that simulating execution in a cyclic circuit is sublinear. Exactly as for an acyclic circuit. There is no difference for the simulator to run a simulation with or without cycle. Because what will happen is that the simulator will never realize that it was among a cycle. It will just explore the proof tree and never care about the fact that there is a possibility of cycle. So the simulation is exactly the same as for a cyclic circuit. That's good. So that's good. So what we have is that UN stabilization is a necessary and sufficient condition. So with delays, it's well, we know that probability is the same as electrical stabilization, and we know that probability with delays is the same as probability without delays. So that's fine, so we can forget altogether about delays. That's very nice. Probability in constructive logic exactly reflects electrical constructivity for all delays. So, good. This is what I mean by electricity is intrinsic. There is something even more, is that if you do the simulation, you do compute. If you have delays, for example, because you have an electronic implementation, if you do the simulation, you can compute the maximum time, the stabilization time, the critical time. So that's fine. But it doesn't give you very nice algorithm. We want more. We want, for example, given a circuit with lots of inputs, does it work for all inputs, or for which input does it work? And we want to deal with sequential circuits with memory and so on. Can we do that? And the answer is yes. And for the algorithm, it's slightly easier to work with ternary logic, so call it Scott ternary logic, Liney ternary logic, or Mr. Joe ternary logic, because it was reinvented lots of times, including in the circuit, instead of saying bottom 0, 1, you say 0, 1, X on the top, which is very convenient when you read papers. So that's Scott Booleans. Everybody knows Scott Booleans, I think. And these slides are not meant for people trained in the field. So I know you know monotone functions, and I know you probably know Boolean disjunction. But I want to come back a little bit on that, because it's a very nice difference between hardware and software. So if you take Boolean disjunction in software, it's well known that there are 3 possible Boolean disjunction. In C, you write E bar E prime, which is the strict one. That is, both arguments have to be defined. So this circle is true. So it's true for true, true, for false, true, 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 false, but it's false for false, false. Okay? And then you deduce by monotonicity. You have another one, which is E bar bar E prime, which is not E parallel E prime, but E left or E prime, which means that if E is true, then you don't care about E prime, even if E prime loops. No problem. And you have this one, which is very nice. And then you have the converse one, of course, symmetrically. And in Scott semantics, you have the parallel OR, which is true as soon as one of the two is OR. Okay? And the bad news for software is that this guy cannot be defined in any programming language, in lambda calculus in particular, by the sequentiality theorem of myself and the stability theorem, actually, for this one. And this one doesn't exist in software. You cannot define that function in lambda calculus. That's not entirely trivial, but it's a consequence of the standardization theorem, basically. And, well, a little more, but not much. And in hardware, it's exactly the contrary. The only one we have is the one we cannot do in software. That is the OR gate. Has exactly this property that as soon as you enter true, even if the other one is bottom, which means non-stabilized, erratic, oscillating, you get a 1 at the output. Very interesting. It's also interesting to see that you can reconstruct the other one, the software one. For example, left OR is X or Y and X or not X. Remember, X or not X means X is stable either to 0 or 1, as is defined. So you can encode the software one into hardware. That's useful, actually. That's sometimes useful when you want to deal with causality structures, when you want to put extra orderings between operations, because these gates have side effects on variables and so on. We use this a lot. Of course, you can do the symmetric here, and then you can do the strict OR that way. It's quite interesting to see that X or not X is a very practical operation. X is stable. I can believe that X has some value. And that's X or not X. Good. So, of course, this ternary logic is the same as constructive logic, because there is an immediate connection between the constructive logic rules and the definition of the OR. That's totally well known. But I write the slide for people who don't know it. And of course, this is not true. And this is true only if E is defined, and that's the same here. That's not true. That's not true either. Good. So that's well known. But the good point, of course, is that with this theory, we have a least fixed point theorem. Actually, it's not good news because some people use it. For example, Edward Lee in Ptolemy does calculation with this, which is a nice way to transform linear time calculation into a square time calculation. So it's not very efficient, but we will make it efficient later. That is, you can compute, you can encode everything with a Boolean function, say that your circuit is a big Boolean function, and then compute the fixed point of this Boolean function, and you will do exactly the same as if you propagate values using the constructive Boolean logic. That's fine. Good. So if you do that on this circuit, you start with, you do this kind of computation, okay? This is a calculation of the fixed point. I mean, you can try that yourself. It will take you about 2 minutes. And you find the fixed point, and that's fine. So that's very well known. You can simulate logic, ternary logic. You can simulate constructive logic by ternary thing in such a very simple context. There is no problem. However, it's not very good. It's not very good because we didn't gain anything, basically. We just transformed a linear algorithm into a sublinear algorithm into a cheaper, more expensive algorithm. But what we can do is to go further by asking ourselves a question. Instead of handling inputs one by one, can we do all of them together? And the answer will be yes, by instead of doing per value evaluation, by doing symbolic evaluation with formulae, which is not surprising either. Basically, you have to encode sets, function, images of set by functions, and in practice also reverse images of set by functions, which is by expressions, which is harder. And the point is that you want to deal with super big things. I mean, we were doing that on huge circuits, not on small circuits like here, on real circuits that you find in your telephone and so on. So you need to find good Boolean calculation techniques, and hopefully they were invented in the end of the 80s in form of BDDs, and they are of course not good in, conceptually, but they work very well for us. Or SAT, and SAT is not as good at that for this question, but it's good as well. And you need to have good formal iteration algorithms to test constructivity. So this has been all implemented in about 1992, and it's available on the web, and you can have these algorithms. And it was based on a very smart BDD system done at Digital Equipment by Madre Couder and Toiti, who made incredible progress in BDDs there. And Tom Scheipel made the causality analysis. So the problem is that we have three-valued logic, so we cannot do BDDs for that, or not easily, but we can do something very stupid, which is to encode three values with two Booleans. And you say that x will be encoded by two Booleans, x defined and the value of x. There are other encodings possible, of course. This is not, maybe not the best, by the way, but the easiest to think of. And you say that bottom is false, false, true is true, true, and false is true, false. That's fine. So I denote x true as xd and xv, and x false, x true. This is a formula that says x is true, and the other one, x is false. Good. Now you can code a set by its characteristic functions. That's nothing new. Okay, that's very, very well known. For example, if you want to have the set x defined and y is false, you say xd and yff. That's no problem. You can code a function by an expression. That's also trivial. That's the tricky point. You can, since you are in a finite set, you can obviously code the image of a function by a finite expression, because the image is an existential quantifier, and the existential quantifier, because you have a finite set here, you can just enumerate, take a big O of the enumeration of the values. If you do that, you're dead, because it's exponential. If you do that nicely, you're not dead. And that's a big, big, big game. And lots of people have been working on that, and especially Couder, who developed extremely good algorithms to do that. which are, of course, exponential worst case, but tend to work very, very well when you use them and nobody knows exactly why. This is on the boundary between science, programming, and alchemistry, I would say. When you hit return, you never quite know what will happen, but it's surprisingly good. If you don't read this thing, never try to do this. So the symbolic iterative algorithm works very, very simply. You re-encode your thing in Scott Boolean. I use blue for Scott Boolean, and I use brown for real Booleans. So in real Booleans, it becomes this expression, and then you compute the fixed point, and I won't do that. Okay, you just believe this is true, unless I made a bug. And then you find the fixed point, and the fixed point is xd, xff, xd, xd. So that's the value of x in the fixed point, the final value, and that's the value of y. And you see that you become very happy because all the outputs are defined when the xd predicate is true, which means that all the outputs are defined when the input is defined. This is exactly what you want. So what you have shown that electrically, the circuit works in all contexts with all delays. So this is exactly what you want. So this algorithm is very nice. And it's been implemented and run on very large example, I can tell you. And it works well. But that's another talk that will be in my course next year, how to do these kind of things in practice. Theory is fine, but practice is different. You know the Yogi Berra word. In theory and practice are the same, but in practice is not true. It also gives you a good gift. It gives you, once you have the fixed point here, you have exactly an acyclic version of the circuit, an equivalent acyclic version of the same circuit. Which means that if your circuit is exponentially smaller than a real one, you may be in trouble, okay? But if you want, this algorithm returns you a perfectly well acyclic version of the circuit that you can give to your founder, because your founder wants an acyclic circuit, and that's fine. What is hard in practice is to really well optimize this circuit. That becomes difficult because BDDs are not that good to synthesize. But with this kind of construction, we did a lot of industrial circuits in my company, and for all of them, without an exception, we were quite better than any human being known. So that's, this works. It's not just theory. Another bonus is that this formal algorithm, in fact, you know, I found XD here, but I can find something more complicated. What this algorithm finds is the predicates that the constructivity predicate for the circuit. That is the predicate that should be satisfied by the inputs so that the circuit will electrically behave well for all delays. This is the result of this algorithm. And remember this circular scheduler. I say here you have a circle, but the circle is cut as soon as you have a 1 in any of these registers. It's cut here if you have this no more cycle if you have a 1 here. It's cut here if you have a 1 here. It's cut in both places if you have two registers, but then the circuit is useless. And it's dangerous only here. Now if you remove the registers, call this an output and this an input, and you run the algorithm, the symbolic algorithm, what it will return you is that the condition for this cyclic circuit to behave well is exactly R1 or R2. This is the result of the algorithm. Tells you what is the best possible, what is the most general predicate that will make this circuit okay. It's R1 or R2, and I told you that's fine, because the circuit will always satisfy R1 or R2, because if there is a token in the beginning, it will keep circling. But that's hand waving. You have to prove it. So how do you prove it? Again, with BDDs. So it's an invariant over the execution of the circuit. So it becomes a model checking problem, and model checking is fine. You can compute reachable states for all clock cycle sequences. And you can do that in the following way. You have the combinational part here. You have the memory here. That's the combinational circuit, OK? And now you know exactly the functioning condition. So it's initially true. That's fine. You take the next state function, and you fix points on it. That is, formally, it's a function, so you can compute its image. So you say, you start with 0. Actually, it's not 0. It's in our case, it's one of the register has Mickey Mouse ears, so it's fine. And then you iterate, you apply R0 union next state, R2 union next state, and so on. And you go to, and each time, at each step, you check that the combinational predicate that makes the circuit constructive is verified at each step. And you go to the fixed point. And when you reach the fixed point by checking equality, then you're done. Of course, this is very hard, because you are dealing with monster BDDs, with very large expression, can deal with thousands of variables, and you have to compute existential quantifiers, and you have to compute equality, and so on, and that's a very delicate game, but the BDD specialists know how to do that. And you need to do all sorts of nice tricks. For example, you know that you apply n, the function n to R1. So you will apply the function n to a particular subset. So the first operation you should do is to simplify the function n, knowing it will be applied to this subset. And that's, there are very nice algorithms by Couder on that, called restrict and constrain. To make n simpler, knowing that it will be applied to the subset without applying it, and then apply it. And this is very, very nice. And in SAT, it's harder to do with it. And then you can use the same techniques to do a very strong optimization of the circuit. And this is why human beings have no chance, because no human being is able to do any kind of Boolean calculation with more than 2 variables, I guess, in a reliable way. So at the end, so we have one iterative algorithm to compute constructivity of the acyclic part, and then we have this big algorithm that computes reachable state. But when you have compute reachable state here, you can simplify this logic, knowing it will apply only to reachable states, and you get something you have no chance to understand. And in my talk at Sophia Antipolis, in my courses, which are on the web, I showed that one of the problems we have in practice, is, which took me 2 years to solve, is the following. You find the bug in the circuit. So you are, and in general, it's exactly in this kind of circuit. There is a bug. The circuit comes back, 1 billion transistors come back, and a bug is found. And you have to correct the bug. So you do that in the source code, but you are not allowed to recompile. You cannot recompile because it's just too expensive. It's in $1 million to recompile. So you need to patch the circuit, the gates in the circuit, and to formally prove that the patch you do on the gates of the circuit on the highly optimized result of this calculation is exactly equivalent to the source code patch. You have to do that. Otherwise, you just don't play. You don't exist in the game. So we could do that, and that was immensely difficult. Anyway, that's not for today. So conclusion, 1, before the bonus. Circuit should be viewed as a proof engine. That's the main message. A circuit is a proof engine. Think of proofs when you think of circuits. It electrically computes proofs in Boolean logic. This is what I used to call, give another name, because I said circuits work because, you know, the old dogma of physics, which is nature hates emptiness. And when you put voltage, electrons hate emptiness and they rush into wire because they are cowards. So this is the hurry coward principle, in fact. So a circuit is simply a folding of proof trees. A good circuit is simply a folding of proof trees. I think this is very important, because when you translate, you will see that for SRL. When we do the semantics of SRL, we do the logic of SRL. We have proof trees, And we discovered that to transform that into a circuit, we just have to find a circuit that folds the proof trees, a structure, a graph, which is the folding of the proof trees of the language, and hop, put electricity in that, and it works. And that's the way we do that. And so that we can, stabilization with delays is the same as stupid constructivity without delays. That's the good news. That's difficult. The other one is easy. And we have a linked model to syntax, but here it's just as usual. And we have all the algorithms for all the things we need in practice on industrial designs. And it has been used, for example, on the Rafale airplane on a large scale. Good. And it's all available. The V5 compiler is not anymore on the web. I don't know why. I will have to re-put it. You know, software rusts. And it had not been recompiled since 2001, and doesn't work anymore. Nobody knows why. I put some references here. The two papers. So this is the initial version. This is the this is the final version. And I must say that the circuit part is mine, but the logic proof is really by Michael Mendler, and that has to be very clear. And I try to follow. And this is the previous version. And this is a book, if you want to know more about what's going on in transient. It's an interesting book by Brozovsky, who did a fabulous algorithm on automata. Good. For the bonus, I want to show you why you should never determinize non-deterministic automata. That's the worst naming ever in computer science, I think. Look why. Here is my preferred expression. If you have read the Berry-Setti paper on translating regular expression on automata, we are talking about this expression, and this is the deterministic automaton. It's trivial and well known that you can put this into a circuit. You just draw the automaton on silicon. A state is a register. The initial state starts with has Mickey Mouse ears, which means it starts with a 1 if you want. A transition is simply an AND gate out of the state is an AND gate with a letter, and there is convergence to same state is an OR gate, and that's trivial. Okay, if you put it's trivial, but of course it has the problem of deterministic automata. Is that if your deterministic automata is not small, you cannot do that simply. Not small meaning. I think even 20 states makes no sense. We did with automata with 10 to the whatever you like states, no problem. So you see it works very easily. For example, if you read an A from here, this will be 0, so nothing will happen here. And then the token will come here. It's called one hot. It's a very hardware-ish name, because only one of the states is hot. Okay, this is why it is called one hot. Now, of course, this automaton, you should not do it because you cannot do it. I mean, if you take a protocol, if you take USB may have, I don't know, 10 to the 50 state or something like that. You cannot do that. If you take the same expression, but you build the non-deterministic automaton. Non-deterministic automaton. Okay, it's just simpler. It has one less arrow, but in general, it's exponentially smaller. You do the same. You do exactly the same. You draw the circuit on your printed circuit board. You draw the thing exactly the same way. Now you look at what's happening when you put electricity. Okay, no size explosion because it's non-deterministic. Good. Let's put an A. You put an A, so you turn on this guy. Excellent. You put now from here, you have to put a B to come back. That's fine. Now let's put a B. What's going on? Aha. Here you have to fill this register. Here you have to fill this register. This is done at the same time. In parallel, and remember, parallel is the only thing that costs nothing in circuit. Sequence is expensive, but parallel is cheap. So that's fine. So what you do, you end up with 2 tokens. No problem. You are in 2 states at the same time. This is called This is called subset construction. That is exactly the algorithm that makes an automaton deterministic. Good. So it works. It works exactly in the same way. So when you put electricity in a non-deterministic automaton, you get a deterministic machine. That's it. So why you can forget about the other one, period. It has no use whatsoever. And you can do software extremely easily out of that. And no problem. What you do, simply, you do topological sort of the gates. Well, it's an exercise for beginners to do software out of that. But you take any Lustre or STRL compiler or whatever, or 2Z compiler, you hit return and you get a nice C program, which is the size of the non-deterministic automaton. So for example, actually this was known since long, but nobody realized it. In Unix, there is a thing called grep, which makes a deterministic automaton. So it's very trivial to make expressions with 10, 11 characters on which grep never replies. And there is another thing called egrep that generates code out of this exactly this way, but I didn't realize they were making circuits, in fact. And this one has no problem whatever with any expression. And, but then try to find me a reason to, and of course, with BDDs and implicit computation, exactly the one I showed, you can ask all the questions you want about this guy. You can really do all the algorithms you want, except the one that for which I never find any use in practice, which is minimizing automata. Never seen any use for that, and especially in optimization, it's very bad because it's irreversible. But that's another story. So the game non-deterministic, the name has fooled everybody for long. I think that the real ones are the non-deterministic ones. Never get deterministic unless you are absolutely forced. There are cases where you are forced to get deterministic. There are Bucci automata for eventuality properties in temporal logic, but that's a different game. I'm talking about recognizers and stupid automata. Good. Okay. Again to automata. Automata are not nice objects mathematically. Another bonus. Little provocative, but it's true, it's obvious. So this is a very, very common thing you find everywhere when you do control, when you do protocols and so on. You have three signals, A and B and R. These are inputs. You have one signal called O, and you have this automaton. Essentially, wait for the last of A and B, and then emit O in the same cycle if you are in hardware. And whenever you have an R, which is reset, you go back to the first state, okay? So this is what everybody would write. And this is for example, in memory write, R is request, A is address, B is data, and write. To write into memory, you need the address and the data. And as soon as you have both, you can write. Excellent. This is very bad. This is very bad. You know, in the spec, you have A, B, R, O written exactly once. And in the automaton, you have A, B, 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 R. It's what is called, it's the worst thing you can do in programming, which is programming by cut and paste. Most dangerous thing. The only thing where cut and paste works is surgery, not programming. Surgery has very much in common with computer science because it is cut and paste. Good. So the problem, the STRL language is an extension of what I said, an extension of circuits where you have enough to make this program linear. That is, you say here you have parallel. So this diamond can be changed into a parallel. So you say await A, parallel await B. And this means wait for the two in parallel, and when both of them have terminated, in no time you terminate. Semicolon takes 0 time, no problem. Await A waits for A, but then the administration is free. Emit O, you see this will generate the diamond. Emit O, because this doesn't take time. It's not like Social Security. Administration is free, takes no time. This O gets smashed into these arrows, and then you say abort when R. Abort is very important. Everything in automata is about do something when. Everything in STRL is about stop doing something when. And so you say whichever state you are in, if you are R up, you get out of that, and you come back by the loop. So this is the same code. That's interesting because it has much to do with all problems in the lambda calculus. That is what we are trying to do, is to share residuals. For those who know the work by Levy, myself, Gontier, Abadi, and so on sharing in the lambda calculus, hopefully we are in a very small case, much simpler, and we can do this sharing. Also, I would like people other than me to show the theorem that what we do is optimal in sharing. I'm not sure of that. And this is sharing residuals. The other syntax is that of David Harel, but the semantics of Harel is complicated in state chart, so it has been done in sync chart by Chalandré. So these are hierarchical automata. Hierarchy is absolutely fundamental. This means do A and terminate, parallel do B and terminate. Within no time you emit O and you go there. And this means whenever you have an R, you kill the internal, and that means that you kill the internal without letting it work. And this is completely industrial. All airplanes built now work with exactly these formalisms. If you fly an A380, or if you fly a Chinese airplane or an Embraer or whatever, they are all programmed this way. With more than that, but all programmed this way. Good. So if you take ABC instead of AB, of course the automaton becomes a little more complicated. The drawing is exactly the same, you just add one guy. So you save one more exponential. Saving exponential is not a detail, huh? So that's very fine. Good. Now, the semantics of STRL, which I will show in 1 second, is the constructive semantics, very similar to that of circuits. And if you know that, then you say, oh, then it defines proof trees, but I can simulate proof trees by proof trees in circuits. That is, I can emulate my proof system by the Boolean proof system, and I can put that directly into circuits. And yes, I take this program, and I translate it into this circuit, the one I've shown in the beginning. And in fact, it's piecewise, well, it's more complicated than that, but I skip details. It's piecewise, you see, it's very structural. And it's quite interesting. And the circuit is a constructive proof network for the language. And it's quite interesting because then the circuit can be very well optimized, which cannot be done for deterministic automata. There are systems you can buy for a lot of money that takes you a deterministic automaton and tries to find an optimal hardware implementation. Essentially, if you have lots of states, you number them, 1, 2, 3. That is, you encode the states with log n bits if you have n states. That's a very bad idea. Even with 20 states, you hit return, you come back 1 week later, no answer. Why? Because it's extremely sensitive to the naming of states. That is, if you say just take a delay line, that is a set of registers. If you number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the logic is nothing. If you name them randomly, the logic is exponential. The next state function has an exponential size to be computed. And there are only factorial n possible numbering, and there is no heuristic to find one good. It's exactly the bad problem to solve. And it's so stupid to solve it, because the good thing is not to start from a deterministic automaton, but to start from this thing, which is a super non-deterministic automaton made deterministic by electricity, if you want. And if you do that, you have a very good thing. So now we have an imperative language. So it's not anymore Boolean equation. It becomes more subtle. And I'll show you what's going on here to understand how the semantic is done, and that will be my last word. So you have if then else. So if then else is more complicated. Huh? For example, x equals x becomes if x, then emit x. So the law of STRL is that the signal is absent by default, and to emit it is asymmetric. It's not like Boolean calculus. If you say nothing, x is silent. If you say emit x, then x is noisy, is 1. 0 is the default, and 1 is 1. Because when you make a complex control system, most signals are 0, and if a signal is 0, you just say nothing, and by miracle it's 0. It simplifies a lot of programming. So if x, then emit x. So if x is true, you emit x, perfectly consistent. If x is false, you don't emit x, perfectly consistent. But it doesn't mean anything. Sorry, this is x equals not x. Let me put that online, because this one is too bad. If I find my note without my old man's glasses. Here are my old man glasses, that's fine. You check your slides, but there are mistakes in them. It becomes, if x is there, then do nothing else emit x, so this is inconsistent, because you say, if I hear x, then I don't emit it, so I cannot hear it, or if I don't hear it, I emit it, that's not nonsense. And Hamlet is, if 2b is then emit 2b, else emit 2b. Okay, and that's more problematic. I had a lot of time to convince people that that should be nothing, and that's it. Okay, so how do we do? How do we chain? What is the chain rule? Basically, when we have a symmetry between true and false, that's the question. We have explicit test and a symmetry between true and false. What becomes the chain rule? So here you have, for example, emit x. If not x, then emit y. If not y, then emit z. So how do we compute that? So you start with, we do ternary logic. Here, say, you start with nothing, and you look at, you look at what you must do. What you must do is the thing you are sure to do. You are sure to do emit x. You are sure to do if not, but then you know nothing about x, so you have to wait. And if not, you have to wait. This is must. Okay? From that, you deduce that x is positive, is emitted. Good. Then you are stuck, and you look at you cannot do. What you cannot do here is you cannot, you know that not x now is false. So you know that you cannot do emit y. And since you cannot do emit y, and since y is the only possible emitter of y, you know that y will not be emitted. So this is a positive deduction of that y must be false because you cannot do any emitter. And that's very positive reasoning. And then by another must, you can see that if not y, then emit z becomes true. And that is emitted. So the semantics define these two predicates, what you must do and what you cannot do. And in my book, they are not really nicely written. Researcher has shown that you can make them completely symmetric, which was not done in my book, stupidly. And then you alternate positive propagation of can and must not. That's cool. The rules look like that. I mean, if you are used to static analysis of programs, you have no choice about the rule. It doesn't matter. What is very important is that the semantics must and cannot is reflected in the circuit, exactly reflected in the circuit, and in the following way. The gates in the circuit, just as I did for the automata, are propagating the control, and the must predicate is implemented by the propagation of ones in the circuit, of one value, and the cannot is propagating of zeros. And these two go in parallel. So the circuit is a parallel engine to compute what must and what cannot be done. And that's quite subtle, what's happening in the circuit. And Lionel Rigg will have to do the cock proof that this is true. And of course, the hard part is the synchronizer, which is exactly the two-adic operator. Here it's stupid, but in the general case, it is the two-adic operator of Georges Gontier I showed in the course on two-adic. And so it's very interesting because nothing in this whole story, this whole story is fully industrial. I mean, this is you can buy it for a lot of money, by the way. If you want, you can also get free versions of the web. This is completely industrial, and I think this is up to some point very well understood, and the way it works is because of things that are classical in logic, which I think is nice. Thank you.
So are there questions in the audience?
You spoke about getting the circuit by folding the proof tree.
Excuse me.
You spoke about getting the circuit by folding the proof tree. Can you spell that out a bit more?
Yeah, what you have, if you come back to the first ones, okay, here. No. If you come back to this one, okay, if you look at any of these two here, any of these two directions, this is basically, the circuit is saying that because C is 1, from C is 1, I deduce that O is equal to this input. Okay? Then this input is equal, this guy is equal to the input of, to F of this input. Then this is, okay. So this is exactly, you can rewrite the proof tree. Well, here it's a line, but in general it will be a tree. You can rewrite this proof tree in the logic. Okay? So it's exactly isomorphic. It's exactly isomorphic. The gate is exactly a trajectory in the circuit is, if you look at the, well, this green path, you can rewrite as a set of rules, as a set of deductions, okay? Now this one, same.
That's another proof tree.
That's another proof tree. But that's another proof tree, but they share the elements. They share the elements. That is, you can say that we have to discover, in fact, you have to discover F and G are the same, that's pretty obvious, but you have to discover that this in fact, you have two deductions, but this multiplexer here is exactly telling you that you can share parts of the two deductions. It's a device to do the sharing, in fact. It's a device to do the sharing. And so, it's not a trivial sharing. You have to take the proof trees and to put the multiplexers. We tell you, I am in this proof tree or I am in this proof tree. That's the role of the multiplexers. And it's quite interesting because that's what we did in the 2-helix thing, for example. You say, we have circuits, they are magic machines. So let's write the spec and shunk. The circuit did it. Huh? So it's exactly that. So the multiplexers are the devices. I mean, the switches, both sides, in fact, are the devices to share. And there is some relation between this and the Gontier-Abadie-Levy construction on the lambda sharing in the lambda calculus. It's the same idea. So I like circuits because they are way simpler and also faster than lambda expressions. But it's the same idea. It's the same idea. The multiplexer is the device that allows you to share, and actually also the fork to share proof trees.
So it's two sharing proof trees that become one circuit.
Yeah, but the transformation is not trivial. It's very often you write the circuit and you discover the proof trees it makes. Going the other way. For example, this didn't come from this kind of a circuit that's same for us. It didn't come from human beings. It came from compilers. Because compilers were saying, I can share this and this. And then, there is a cycle. And human beings didn't think of that, to my knowledge. So it's not an obvious sharing. You have to insert the right thing. But it's like an adder shares all the possible additions. And it's interesting. I mean, when I discuss with Jean Vuillemin about circuits, he takes an FFT and then explains me what's happening in the sharing of the circuit, essentially. So that's the art of doing circuits, I think.
Okay, any other question? Okay, so let's thank Gérard again.
Thank you.